Hello, and welcome to the Overcoming Podcast with your host, Adriana Lewin. Before we jump into today's episode, if you could please kindly subscribe to this podcast, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at _Adriana_Lewin. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Overcoming Podcast. I am very excited to bring on a new guest. His name is Drew Driver. He is the owner of Apex Therapy. He is a therapist who has been in recovery for his own addictions, leading him to the field of recovery for others. He is also pursuing his CSAT, the Certified Sex Addiction Therapist, and opening more offerings for group therapy in the DFW area. Thank you so much for joining me today, Drew.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, today I would love to take some time and talk a little bit about sex therapy and sex addictions. And I always enter this conversation with a little bit of caution, because I feel like sex addiction is such a controversial term in the world of therapy. Some people say that it's not really a thing, like pornography addiction and all that stuff. So I would love to hear just a little bit about what brought you to this field and what makes you passionate about it.
Okay. Well, I guess what brought me to this field is a retort to those people that say sex addiction and porn addiction aren't a real thing. I feel like I absolutely struggled with sex addiction through a significant portion of my 20s and 30s. And then finally, my symptoms presented in such a way that I was actually forced into counseling. Like a lot of people that I treat, partners get fed up and say, do something about this or I'm out of here. I can be a very powerful motivator. It was for me. And so I moved into seeing a counselor. Again, and like a lot of the common theories out there for people that haven't experienced this, I didn't think it was a thing. I thought I had a high libido, and I thought I got married too young, all the stories we tell ourselves, and found out it's very real. And I had a really gifted CSAT, which you mentioned. I'm pursuing my certification as a sex addiction therapist, and I was lucky enough to find a really gifted CSAT that guided me through the process, kind of explained the way the brain works and reacts in terms of connecting dysfunctional sexual activity as a relief for high levels of anxiety when you have zero emotional coping skills. And that was me. I was I don't know, this is not a clinical term, but I was a raging sex addict. I had no coping skills whatsoever except for that. So I moved into those behaviors and experienced kind of the whole gambit of porn addiction, sex addiction, until I got help. And that was the only thing that provided relief from it was some really intense counseling work. I did some significant group work. And through that process, I really started to connect with that existence without a high level of anxiety. And that's what finally pulled me into the counseling world. I really, really experienced something that I never had before, and started to look around and see how many people were suffering from various degrees of it. Because sex addiction it's so insidious. It happens in isolation. It pulls us out of connection.
Yes.
We don't share with the people that could give us some healthy, functional guidance. And the shame aspect of it ramps up your anxiety, which makes the payoff when we act out sexually that much more intense and quote unquote addictive. And for the people that don't think it is actually addictive, There's a lot more science behind it now on brain scans, comparing the brain scan of someone when they orgasm versus the brain scan of someone that's on heroin, and it looks very similar. I mean, our brain just lights up. Um,
Wow.
and from and if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, one aspect, we're hardwired to procreate the species, right? That's,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as humans, right, we're a pretty unique animal in that we're more apt to couple, right? But from that perspective, we're hardwired, right? And it's got to be something pretty powerful. I was having a discourse the other day with somebody, and it just was like how the question sometimes, how can you think about sex at a time like this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of it leads you into that. Well, that's why, because it is one of the most powerful drives we have. And in today's society, right, where we don't necessarily have near as many legitimate sources of anxiety in terms of potential death, right, where this may be our last chance to make sure that our version of our species is continued, right?
Mm-hmm.
That in our heads all the time, though, right? We think that we are apt to take the close of business on a Friday. If we don't have a certain number on the sales board, we will translate that in our dysfunctional brain into a life and death situation. So we create that anxiety, and we create the need for the payoff that our dysfunctional addicted brains want. And I don't, I really, with my clients, I don't care what you call it. I mean, I'm with you. I think sex addiction is an abrasive term
Mm-hmm.
that keeps a lot of people that are on the peripheral, right? Because addiction, as I don't think very many people would argue, addiction is progressive. And the earlier you can catch yourself before that neural pathway gets really, really deep, the
Mm-hmm.
better you have of arresting those behaviors. And sex addiction, I feel, keeps people that are moving into emotional isolation, right? That haven't moved into processes yet that are necessarily against their moral code, um, would seek help from a sex addiction therapist to create emotional connection, right? As much as arresting these behaviors. So um, that was a wildly long-winded answer to how I got into this. But if you can't tell, I'm super passionate about it. I feel like it's a field that is wildly underserved, and rightfully so. It's a difficult arena. It takes a lot of courage as a therapist, and it takes a lot of courage to come forward and seek help for this.
Yeah.
So it's really intense, but I love it. I could not be happier to be where I'm at, to be expanding opportunities at Apex, to touch more clients in a group setting. Um, that's one of the things I struggle with daily, is just the hurdle of, yeah, you can only see people once every hour and a half or so ethically,
Yeah.
right? And I'm just like, I have so much to share, and there's so many people I want to help. So
It's
I have to put my
interesting. It's interesting because, in this field, I have had many women. I have also had men. I love working with men, but I've had several women talk about their spouses' use of pornography, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
women feel it's a betrayal often. But then there are the select few who say, I participate in watching pornography too. Like that's something that my spouse and I do for like foreplay. So what are your thoughts on just integrating pornography into your sex life, period?
From a if someone comes to me
Mm-hmm.
and they need help from a therapeutic perspective because they need to address their sexual dysfunction, that is something I would encourage removing. But again, it's like alcohol, right? I mean, if someone came to me and they're an alcoholic and they said I need to stop drinking, I would say, well, let's stop drinking everything. We've got to
Mm-hmm.
reset. We need a hard reset. So even light beer, I don't want you drinking light beer, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I'm not on it's not moral high ground by any stretch.
Yeah.
It is literally, if you're struggling with healthy emotional connection, right? Which that's the core of sex addiction for most people, is healthy
Mm-hmm.
emotional connection, right? They have
Yeah.
no coping skills that are significant enough to deal with the anxiety. And then the payoff, the addiction has become its own process and started to create its own anxiety because it knows if you get anxious enough, it's going to get what it wants. So
Interesting.
if someone is in a healthy, connected, sexual relationship that they enjoy that includes pornography, by all means, you're probably not going to be in my office,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But if someone comes to me and says, yeah, there's dysfunction here, pornography has the ability to reset your sexual template to where you are not as connected with the physical body. You're not as connected with physical touch. Your brain has in essence become pixelated. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're dialed into, right? And what I make up you're describing in a healthy way, if you are consummating that sexual activity that starts with pornography and finishes with you as a connected couple, physically, intimately, and eventually orgasm comes through mutual pleasure and connection physically, I don't see anything wrong with that at all. But again, uh, that's not the person that's going to end up in my office, right? That's, you
Yeah.
found what you like. Sex, very unique, which is, my work is, where has it become dysfunctional? Where have you lost control? Right. And what you're
Uh-huh.
describing sounds like a very controlled environment.
I'm just wondering if there's like if it can be a slippery slope. No pun intended.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think anytime that you bring an extra source into a sexual couple, it's a slippery slope. I mean, from the same point of bringing an extra, bringing a partner in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, let's mix it up. Let's have a menage. Let's get another person in here. Again, the way we connect emotionally during sex is that eye contact and what we're focused on when we orgasm, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
what cements our sexual template. So when we start to bring in other triggers or other opportunities to be focused on something other than our partner during sex,
Mm-hmm.
it's a slippery slope. And it's not, oh my God, we did this once and now I'm this raging sex addict. That's not it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but from what you're describing, yeah, it absolutely can be. Pornography is horrifying these days because of the access.
Yeah.
Because before, and this is revealing my age, right? You gotta wait, you gotta find the right channel on the TV, and you're using the little clicker on top of the TV, right? This is again how old I am, right? And you gotta find the right channel with the right movie on there. And now it's right there on your phone. You have a disagreement. It's not even a blow up argument. You just have a little disagreement, creates a little anxiety, and you go right to your phone and you have access to anything in the world. So
Yeah.
it's the research and the level of dysfunction is starting to catch up, and it's horrifying. It's just frightening how many kids in middle school, and it's gradually ticking down, right? It's gradually moving further and further down. First it was college, and then it was high school kids, and now it's in infiltrating the middle schools, but children that are just really, really dysfunctionally setting their sexual template at an age when their little brains just cannot handle it.
Yeah.
And it's because they have such easy access to pornography. So, and that whole nother, side road there is, if you have kids, what kind of precedent are you setting there? What kind of, messaging, when you trick up your sex life, right? How is that? But again, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm trying to morally high side anybody, because that's not it at all.
Hmm.
I am, do what you like and do what works for you. But there are so many ways that this type of dysfunction can start. And then we don't realize we're full blown in an addictive mode until, we're 3 marriages into, you know, our 40s, and can't figure out why nobody gets us, that type of deal. It just is so insidious, and it's not something we talk about.
So at what point would you define it as being somewhat of an addiction? Like, if some people use it,
Well,
very sparingly. I hope that's the right way to
yeah,
say it in English.
sure.
Um,
Sounds good. Sparingly. I like it.
sparingly, and then some people use it more. I mean, and I want to say compulsively, but I know there are going to be people that are listening, adult men and women, who will say, well, I have control over this. Like, I'm choosing to watch this. This is not a
Yeah,
compulsion for me. So
right.
at what point does
Then
it cross over?
I think now this is for my clients, and it's why I'm not a big fan of, are you an addict or not? I don't care, right?
Yeah.
And you don't have to be an addict to have something dysfunctional that you'd like to address sexually in your life, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and I have clients that I've worked with that we just use the term sex addiction to point them in the right place to get help, right?
Hmm.
If you're struggling with anything sexually, go see somebody that's an expert on sex addiction, because we have the tools for whatever you're struggling with, right? And
Hmm.
we can do that. But for me, when I start to um, try and get a client focused, right? So again, the first part is, are you attempting to stop and you can't do it, right? That's my first question. Then yeah, you could classify that as an addiction. You want to stop and you can't. It's pretty simple.
Hmm.
And who cares what it is? Because you're not going around talking to everybody about it. You're not you're not wearing a t-shirt, right? Says
Hmm.
I'm a sex addict. So if labeling it as that gets you to the place to get the most effective help, then pursue it that way, right? Embrace that this is an aspect of sex addiction. And if I go see a CSAT, it's not this life sentence, and it doesn't mean I'm an addict. It means I'm going to get the most effective help from somebody that is the most qualified to deal with sexual dysfunction. Um, and the second part of that for me would be, if someone isn't connecting with that process, set some goals and see if you can achieve them, right? And
Hmm.
at the day, again, addict is such an abrasive word, um, and it prevents people from going and getting help in areas of dysfunction, because, oh my God, I don't want people to think I'm a sex addict, or I'm not a sex addict, so I don't need to go see a CSAT, right? Well, what
Hmm.
if you're just struggling in a marriage that you've been in for 10 years, which that's a drop in the bucket, right? In terms of
Hmm.
a life, and you just feel like your sex life has stalled out, and you start to explore other things. Well, why wouldn't one of those means of exploration be a counselor that may be able to reconnect you in a healthier way with your partner emotionally, that will absolutely improve your sex life? So again, I try not to get too bogged down, and I know this is really almost, God, it just sounds weird to say, I'm I'm pursuing my certification as a sex addiction therapist, and I don't really like the term addiction a whole lot.
Yeah.
But I feel like there are so many people out there that are suffering from these symptoms that we group into sex addiction, and they are horrified of that little area and being grouped in that place or being part of this group or being considered a sex addict. And it just is preventing people from moving into really creating a healthy emotional connection with their partners, right? Or with themselves,
Yeah.
right? It's not just about the partner. I mean, I have clients that pornography really starts to isolate them from a full experience of life. And I know it's a little different now. I've got some younger clients that their life is online. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
everyone they interact with is online. So, right there in the middle of all the games and all the groups and all the chats and all the interaction that's healthy. It's not that's not dysfunctional. Is access to something that can that will, if left unchecked, prevent you from creating that healthy connection with somebody, and then that healthy physical connection with somebody.
You know,
So
the
slippery slope is right. I try not to sound like this commercial that's on repeat, right? But there's just so many layers of this that are so take up so much emotional bandwidth, right? That people just don't move into until they hit a rock bottom. And it's like there's so much more there if they
I
embrace the process early.
I want to like chime in because what I see often, um, and I think this is where people should seek a certified sex addiction therapist out, is when they're talking about my spouse's libido is either too high or too low, right? Like I want sex more than my spouse, or my spouse wants more sex than me. And there's this like disconnect, sexually disconnect. But who's the wrong person in this scenario? Is the person actually having a low libido, or is the person actually having a high libido, right? Like that's something that um only really when you start going to an expert, a sex therapist, and diving into that process, then you're really able to take a look at why are we not connecting sexually? Like, why is there this conflict around the frequency or the intensity or whatever, right? Like, if there's dissatisfaction in your sex life, then at some point, instead of asking people on Facebook, my spouse wants more sex than me, why is this a problem? Or my spouse isn't giving me enough sex. Like,
Not a great go for advice.
not a good place to go, because there's so much more, like you said, it's layers, right? Like
Yeah.
there's that
Yep.
the level of connection, or is
Yeah.
there, to me, in the back of my mind, I'm always like, okay, is there childhood trauma at play here? Like any sort of level of childhood trauma or even adult trauma, right? Like unwanted touch, or if you've had, I mean, I hate to say it like this, but if you've had experiences with people in your life who have is it emasculated, right? Emasculated?
Yeah. Yeah.
Emasculated you, or just people who have created such low self-esteem or something, like not connecting to some extent. Like you said, the act of sex is an act of connection. And so people are seeking to resolve, what you said was people seek to resolve their anxiety
Mm-hmm.
through sexual act. Can you talk a little bit about why? Like, what is it about the sexual act of orgasms and all that other stuff that makes someone seek that out as an anxiety coping behavior?
Well, it's the intensity of the drugs that our brain and body release when we orgasm. I mean, that's why we seek it out, right? Just like anything else, it is a chemical release from a level of anxiety or disconnect that we would take months of work to create a process to soothe, right, or to create that relief otherwise. And it's like I talked about earlier, that our brain creates a level of anxiety that we need that immediate relief. We think we need that immediate relief, right? I mean, again, how many times do people joke, if I don't have sex, I'm going to explode,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Or, man, I need it. I need it. Well, we bastardize it, right? There's two things, right? What I make up what you were describing in the libido challenge, right? Of high libido
Mm-hmm.
versus low libido. It is an emotional connection, right? And I make up that sexual connection requires one of two things. Um, Either vulnerability with your partner, right? Because what you're talking about and working through that libido challenge or working through sexual issues together requires massive vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it requires communication, which we're not real good at as a society, um, before, right? Once we start the act, we're not having healthy communication,
Yeah.
right? That is not, right? You may say, oh, do this. I like this. I like the way this feels. That is sexual communication and guidance.
Mm-hmm.
That's not healthy emotional communication, right? So you need that vulnerability, or you need anonymity. And that's where the sexual dysfunction comes about, right? If I can go and have what I would think of as a one night stand, right? And I had been emasculated before, right? I've been traumatized by a partner that laughed at me for whatever reason, right? Or something inappropriate at a time when I was just, and it just sexually traumatized me. Well, I may shy away completely from the vulnerability necessary to share that with my spouse or to
Mm-hmm.
share that with a sexual partner that I'm also becoming emotionally invested in. But I have no problem masturbating to pornography because there's complete anonymity. I have no problem having sex with a prostitute because it is a cash arrangement and
Mm-hmm.
there's no emotional connection. So I have in essence that anonymity, right? So it's all about communication and understanding what's happening there, right? Because there's a very big difference in someone with a high libido saying, I need sex. We desire sex, we desire it, and we may have a higher desire for it. And we don't have the connection to the emotional language
Mm-hmm.
that is required to create the vulnerability with our partner who may have that low libido for a lot of the things you just threw out as examples. Um, or maybe they just need that stronger emotional connection, right?
Yeah.
And the only way you bridge that gap is through communication. And then if you recognize there are significant barriers that the other person doesn't understand, that's where you can move in and work with a therapist and see, okay, what part of this is mine? What part, where am I withholding sex, right? Where should I
Mm-hmm.
be more vulnerable? And again, it's always a personal choice, right? It's never, oh well, you
Mm-hmm.
should, you're married, should, right? That's not ever what it's about. Talk about a massive anxiety multiplier, right? Oh, you're married, right? You're supposed to be having sex with me as much as I want, right?
Yeah.
And and then that can lead to the dysfunctional attitude of, well, we're married and you're not fulfilling your part of this, or we're partners, you're not fulfilling your part of this. Then I will resort to pornography. I will resort to other partners, other forms of sexually acting out. So again, there are so many layers, right? And it's regardless of what layer you find yourself struggling with, or where you're at, the counseling process can be so therapeutic. And again, the reason I kind of struggle with sex addiction is because the work is never really about sex. That's just the presenting factor, right? The work is about emotional repair, right? Emotional restructuring, reparenting, learning these things that created this chasm between being able to take care of our own anxiety by talking, by explaining, by comforting ourselves, by soothing ourselves, and moving into a very powerful but dysfunctional process to do that.
So in an orgasm, I don't know all of the chemicals that are released, but I do know about oxytocin, that when you orgasm, your body releases oxytocin, right? And oxytocin, and you can totally tell me if I'm like way off base here, but oxytocin is that bonding and calming, connecting hormone, right? Where when you're breastfeeding a child, that there's oxytocin, so both the mother and the child feel connected and relaxed and just a place of peace, right? And so that is the same chemical that is released in an orgasm. And so when you are doing things like pornography, then essentially you're not necessarily, you're getting the feel good, like relaxing aspect of it, but missing out on the connection part. Is there anything else that comes into play? And do you think that that also creates, shame even further? Like, I felt good, but I still don't feel good emotionally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't delve really intensely into the deep science of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I stay superficial, and what you're describing again is setting the sexual template is the terminology that I use. So again, if you're releasing all those chemicals, that is a wildly powerful behavioral stimuli for whatever you're doing to make that happen, right? I mean, Pavlov's dog, right? If this is what I do to get those chemicals released, right? Why do we make why are we designed that we release that chemical when we breastfeed our children? Because it is the most important process to their growth and development, right? They have to be fed, right? And this is, I guess, more evolutionary, right? We've figured out ways to short circuit that, just like everything else. But that's why that chemical is released, right? Because if it's just the baby getting a benefit from it, the mom's like, I could do without this. I mean, I'm not a mother, I don't know, but that chemical release do it, right? And it connects us. And I do make up, there's absolutely something to that, to having those chemicals released into your system and then being alone.
Yeah.
Right. And then sitting with yourself. And in that absence, right, the vacuum pulls in depression and anxiety. Right. And again, I don't try and get too technical in explanations. Because I don't think you have to go there with most people to find an effective solution to the symptoms that are part of their structuring goal to alleviate.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, absolutely. I don't know what the science behind when you have those chemicals dumped into your body and there's no one there to physically connect with. I don't know what that does other than create a feeling of despair.
Yeah.
So, again, the process that I go through with my clients is it's not, we're not trying to make this dysfunctional process healthy, right? We're trying to replace it functional, healthy process, which is, yes, experience that with somebody and feel the difference, right? Recognize how different that is to connect with someone emotionally and physically at the same time. And it's absolutely life-changing.
Yes, for sure. Well, um, if somebody wants to try and learn more about your services, how can they get a hold of you, learn more about you?
They can go to my website at apextherapytx.com. That has a list of all of our services. It has a brief bio if you missed my bio on me. Um, I try and be very upfront and clear with how I operate with my clients,
Mm-hmm.
to make the selection of a therapist easier on them, hopefully. But that is absolutely the best way. They can go to apextherapytx.com. There is a place on there to schedule a consultation, and they can also contact us via phone if they want to talk. If they want to talk to us. So pretty simple. And I've got 3 classes starting up at the beginning of May. I do individual therapy, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and I love it. I think we talked earlier before we started. I am really passionate about this work and sharing my experience and what I've learned, which I feel like is one of the big differentiators in my process. Is I've been there. People don't have to come in. I mean, it's healthy for them to process, but they don't have to guess if I know what they're feeling and experiencing, because I've been there. I
Yeah.
was in the dumps. So so sharing that with more people is my passion. So I've got 3 groups, a sex addicts group. I've got a Christian sex addicts group where people can feel more free to explore their Christianity if they want in that group. Um, and then I've got a partners of sex addicts group where partners can come in who maybe are struggling to understand their partner's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is this such an issue? What are they thinking and feeling? And trying to get through that that emotional language disconnect that most partners of sex addicts are going to experience.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I've got. That's and you can find it all on apextherapytx.com.
I am so thankful that you have, chosen this path as one of your areas of specialization, because I have plenty of clients who have a spouse that has struggled with, um, sex addiction, not just in pornography, but just even like,
Yeah.
um, basically guilting the other couple into having more sex by, and I hate saying manipulation because, but it is what it is. In a sense, it's kind of manipulation that,
Yeah.
woe is me, I really need this, and don't I do good things for you, right? Like, um,
Yeah.
and then I've also have clients who are men who have struggled with understanding why pornography has been an issue in their relationship, and not seeing an issue with it until they realize, oh, okay, I'm making some connections now. So even, I guess really for any of my clients, or not clients, any of the people who are listening, um, for those of you who want to know more about, how to improve your sex life, really, that both you and your spouse are equally satisfied, then definitely get a hold of Drew, Drew Driver, through apextherapytexas.com. So thank you so much, Drew, for joining me today. And I will post all of your information in the notes below for those of you who want to get a hold of him. So thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been great. I appreciate it. And we will talk soon.
Thank you so much, audience, for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Drew Driver himself. I hope you guys have a great day.